You know, they call this place Harmony Creek. Funny name for a town that's seen more than its share of discord. I'm Frank. Lived here my whole life. Worked 40 years at the steel mill until it shut down. Just like everything else. Now, my days are quiet. Too quiet. Since my Martha passed. Just me. This old house that smells of coffee and sawdust. And the mournful sound of the freight train rattling past at dusk. It's a simple life. Or at least, it was. Before we get into the thick of it, I gotta ask, if you believe a child deserves to feel safe in their own family. Do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Because what happened in this small Ohio town, it's a story that needs to be heard far and wide. It started on a Friday. One of those gray, indecisive autumn days where the sky can't decide whether to rain or just hang heavy over the world. My son, Michael, pulled up in his beat-up Ford, the engine rattling like a jar of loose bolts. He was working a double shift down at the warehouse, again. Ever since he lost his wife, my wonderful daughter-in-law Sarah, in that car accident 2 years ago. The kid's been running on fumes, trying to climb out of a mountain of debt and medical bills she left behind. He brought my grandson, Leo, to the door. Leo's 9, a good kid, smart as a whip, but he's had his mom's smile stamped out of him. He stood there on the porch, clutching his backpack, his shoulders hunched a little, like he was trying to make himself smaller. "Hey, Dad," Michael said, his eyes tired, rimmed with the kind of exhaustion coffee can't fix. "Thanks again for doing this. Karen, my sister, she's got a church thing all weekend." "It's no trouble, son. You know that." I looked at Leo, who was staring at his shoes. "Hey, slugger, your grandpa's got pizza coming. Your favorite." He didn't look up, just a little nod. That was the first thing. The kid used to light up like a firefly at the mention of pizza. Michael knelt down, his voice strained with a cheerfulness that didn't reach his eyes. "Be good for Grandpa, okay, Leo? I'll see you Sunday." He hugged him, but Leo's arms just stayed limp at his sides. I watched Michael's truck disappear down the street, leaving a puff of blue smoke hanging in the air, and a heavy silence settled over the porch. Inside, I tried to make things normal. I put the football game on the old box TV. The familiar roar of the crowd and the drone of the announcers usually filled the space. But that day, it just felt like noise. Leo sat on the far end of the couch, perfectly still, his hands folded in his lap. He wasn't watching the game, he was watching the front door. As if expecting someone to walk through it and tell him he was sitting wrong. An hour later, I went to the kitchen to grab a soda. "Hey, kiddo," I called out. "Pantry's open if you want a snack before the pizza gets here. There are some granola bars. Chips." I heard his small feet pad across the floor. I expected to hear the crinkle of a bag. But there was nothing. I poked my head around the corner. He was just standing there, in front of the open pantry, staring at the boxes of snacks like they were an impossible puzzle. "Everything all right, Leo?" He flinched, just a little, like I'd caught him doing something wrong. He looked at me, his eyes wide and serious. Is it okay if I have one of the granola bars?" "Grandpa? Just one." I chuckled, but it felt hollow. "Buddy, you don't have to ask. You're at your grandpa's house. You can have the whole box if you want." He didn't smile. He just carefully took one single bar, unwrapped it with the precision of a bomb disposal expert, and ate it in small, neat bites. He folded the wrapper into a tiny square and put it directly in the trash can. No mess, no crumbs, nothing out of place. It was unsettling. I know my sister Karen is a stickler for rules. A real place for everything and everything in its place kind of woman. But this felt different. This felt like walking on eggshells. The rest of the night was the same. "Grandpa, is it okay if I use the restroom?" "Grandpa, what time do I need to be in bed?" "Grandpa, am I allowed to have a glass of water?" Each question was polite, delivered in a quiet, formal tone that didn't belong to a 9-year-old boy. It was like he was a visitor in a museum, afraid to touch anything, afraid to breathe too loud. I tried to tell myself I was being a paranoid old man, that this was just Karen's discipline at work. But later that night, after I'd tucked him in, I stood in the doorway of the guest room, watching him sleep. The faint glow of a streetlight filtered through the blinds. casting stripes across his bed. He wasn't peaceful. He twitched, his legs kicking beneath the covers. And he mumbled things I couldn't quite hear. A small, choked sound escaped his lips. And standing there, in the quiet of my old house, with the distant train whistle crying out, Sunday morning arrived with a low, gray ceiling of clouds that promised a cold rain. The silence in the house felt different now. It wasn't the comfortable quiet of a man used to his own company, it was the tense, waiting silence of a hunter in a blind. I made pancakes, the way Martha used to, with little chocolate chips that would melt and make smiley faces. Leo ate 3, but only after I insisted. My voice may be a little too loud, a little too cheerful. Eat up, kiddo, there's plenty more. He didn't ask for permission this time, but he watched me from the corner of his eye with every bite, as if waiting for the rules to suddenly change back. Michael's truck was supposed to arrive at noon. At 10:30, Leo was already packed, his little backpack sitting by the front door, his shoes neatly placed beside it. He had retreated back to the far end of the couch, a silent sentinel waiting for his ride. The life of the party. This kid was not. At 12:05, the familiar crunch of tires on my gravel driveway broke the silence. I glanced out the window, and my gut tightened. It wasn't just Michael. My sister Karen was in the passenger seat, her posture ramrod straight even in the confines of that old truck. I opened the door before they even knocked. Well, look what the cat dragged in, I said, trying to sound jovial. Karen stepped out, pulling her perfectly ironed cardigan tight against the damp air. She's 10 years younger than me, but sometimes she acts like she's my mother. Her eyes immediately scanned the porch, probably checking for dust. Frank. Michael was just so exhausted. I thought I'd come along to help with Leo. She said it with a smile. But it wasn't a question. It was a statement of purpose. Michael did look wrecked. He gave me a tired nod and tried to smile at his son. Hey, buddy, ready to go? Leo slid off the couch, his movements precise, and went to the door. As he bent down to put on his shoes, Karen was already on him. She swooped in, her hands fussing over his collar, smoothing down his hair. Did you have a good time with Grandpa, Leo? She asked, her voice sweet as saccharin. I hope you weren't any trouble. You know how you can get when you're overexcited. The subtext hit me like a physical blow. You are a burden. You are a problem to be managed. Leo just mumbled, no, Aunt Karen. And what's this? She picked a piece of lint off his shirt with theatrical displeasure. Frank, did you let him have pizza? You know how that much cheese upsets his stomach. She looked at me, and for a second, I wasn't her older brother, I was a disobedient child being scolded. Before I could answer, it happened. Leo, in his haste to tie his shoes under Karen's hawk-like gaze, fumbled the laces. He dropped one end. It was nothing, a simple, childish mistake. Karen's voice changed, the sugary sweetness evaporated, and what was left was cold and sharp as chipped ice. Leo, pay attention to what you are doing. Now. It wasn't a shout. It was barely more than a whisper. But the effect it had on my grandson. I'll take that image to my grave. Leo flinched. It wasn't a big, dramatic recoil. It was a small, almost imperceptible thing. A sudden tightening of his shoulder blades. A quick, downward jerk of his head. His chin tucking toward his chest. It was the involuntary, practiced movement of someone bracing for a storm they knew was coming. A reflex honed by repetition. The whole world seemed to slow down. In that split second, I saw everything. The pizza, the pantry, the permission, the nightmares, it all clicked into place like the tumblers of a lock. And Michael? He missed it. He was busy grabbing Leo's backpack. Yawning, already thinking about the mountain of work waiting for him tomorrow. Come on, you two, he said, oblivious. Let's get this show on the road. Karen's smile was back in place instantly, as if it had never left. She straightened up, patted Leo's head, a gesture that now looked menacing, and herded him toward the truck. Leo didn't look at me as he left. He just kept his eyes glued to the gravel. One small soldier marching back to his post. I stood on the porch, the cold air seeping into my bones, and watched the taillights of Michael's truck disappear into the gray afternoon. The first drops of rain began to fall, cold and fat against the concrete steps. I stayed right there until the truck was long gone. the engine's rattle fading into the hum of the town. I turned and walked back into my empty, silent house. But the quiet was different now. It was filled with the ghost of that flinch. I walked over to the couch and saw it, a small green army man Leo must have left behind. I picked it up, the cheap plastic cool against my palm. A toy soldier, left behind on the battlefield. The unease I'd felt all weekend was gone. In its place was a cold, hard certainty. My sister was a bully. My son was blind. And my grandson was trapped. And I, Frank Miller, retired, tired, and old. I was the only one who had seen it. The question was no longer if something was wrong. The question was, what in the hell was I going to do about it? After they left, the house was so quiet I could hear the hum of the old refrigerator and the ticking of the mantel clock counting out the seconds. Each tick felt like a hammer blow against the silence. I walked through the rooms. A ghost in my own home. The space feeling too big, too empty. Leo's scent was still in the guest room, that faint, sweet smell of a little boy, but his presence was gone. Replaced by the chill of what I had seen. I sank into my worn-out recliner. The springs groaning in protest. The green army man was still clutched in my fist. I set him down on the end table. A lone plastic sentinel standing guard over nothing. My dinner was a can of soup. Heated up on the stove and eaten standing over the sink. I didn't have the heart to sit at the table. Not tonight. The sight of that empty chair, the one where Leo had sat so rigidly, was more than I could bear. As I rinsed my bowl, my eyes drifted to a framed photo on the windowsill, tucked behind Martha's old spice rack. It was from Leo's 4th birthday. Michael was holding him, beaming, and my daughter-in-law, Sarah, was leaning in, her arm around them both. A smudge of chocolate frosting on her nose. She was laughing, and just like that, the memories came flooding back, not as gentle waves, but as a tidal wave that knocked the air from my lungs. I remembered the sound of this house when Sarah was alive. It wasn't quiet. It was filled with the music of her laughter. It echoed off these walls, bright and effortless. I could close my eyes and hear her and a tiny Leo in this very kitchen, making a glorious mess, their hands covered in flour as they tried to make my Martha's famous apple pie. Leo's giggles were high-pitched and unrestrained, the sound of pure, uncomplicated joy. He wasn't asking for permission to have a cookie then, he was sneaking bits of dough when he thought no one was looking. His face a perfect picture of mischievous delight. My gaze drifted out the window to the old oak tree in the backyard. I could see her so clearly, pushing Leo on the swing I built for him. The sun would filter through the leaves, dappling the grass, and her hair would catch the light like spun gold. She'd be singing some silly song off key, and Leo would be pumping his little legs, trying to touch the sky, shouting, "Higher, Mama, higher." There was no fear in him. None. Only the absolute certainty that his mother's hands were there, steady and sure, ready to catch him. Those were the days of Sunday dinners, the table groaning under the weight of pot roast and mashed potatoes. The air thick with the easy chatter of a family that was whole. Michael was a different man back then. He smiled with his whole face, the exhaustion not yet carved into the lines around his eyes. He was a husband and a father. And he was happy. A car horn blared out on the street, snapping me back to the present. The memory evaporated, leaving behind the cold, sterile silence of my kitchen. The laughter was gone. The warmth was gone. Sarah was gone. And the boy she had raised? The carefree, loud, beautifully messy little boy who believed he could touch the sky. He was gone, too. In his place was this quiet, haunted little ghost who asked for permission to eat a granola bar. A boy who flinched at a sharp word. A boy who folded his trash into a neat little square. And the worst part, the part that twisted in my gut like a knife, was that this ghost had been created right under our noses, by my own blood. I walked into the living room and looked at the picture on the mantelpiece, the same one. A bigger copy. Sarah, Michael, Leo, a perfect, happy family frozen in time. I reached out and my calloused finger traced the outline of her smiling face. A silent promise formed in my mind. A vow to the ghost of the woman my son had loved. The mother my grandson had lost. I see it, Sarah, I thought. The words a raw ache in my chest. I see what they're doing to your boy. And I swear on my life, I won't let it stand. The quiet of the house no longer felt empty. It felt charged. The mission had begun. I wasn't just a grandfather watching from the sidelines anymore. I was going to get your boy back. I was going to find the truth, no matter how ugly it was, and drag it out into the light. It was a Tuesday, and the weather had finally broken. A weak, watery sunlight was trying its best to push through the clouds. I spent the morning puttering around the house, fixing a leaky faucet, oiling a squeaky door hinge, the kinds of small, pointless tasks you do when your mind is wrestling with a problem too big to solve with a wrench. Every corner of the house seemed to echo with Leo's fearful politeness, with the ghost of his flinch. It was the why of it that was eating at me. Karen had always been difficult, prickly, but this cold, calculated cruelty? Where did that come from? Looking for a distraction, I found myself in the hall closet, pulling down a heavy cardboard box overflowing with old photo albums. I told myself I was looking for pictures of a happier Leo, proof of the boy I needed to save. But I think, deep down, I was looking for something else. An answer, an origin story for the monster hiding in my sister's skin. I sat on the floor, the musty smell of old paper filling the air, and started turning the thick, yellowed pages. There were the awkward school pictures, the blurry holiday snaps, the faded Polaroids of family vacations we could barely afford. And then I found it. A picture from around 1995. Michael and Karen, standing in the front yard. Michael, about 17, was grinning, holding up a shiny plaque that read, All-State Quarterback. He was the town hero, the golden boy, his future stretching out bright and limitless before him. And next to him was Karen, a year older, her smile tight, her eyes looking somewhere past the camera. She was holding a thick, white envelope. Seeing that envelope, it was like a key turning in a rusted lock. The memory, buried for over 20 years, came rushing back so fast it made me dizzy. Flashback. The memory is set in our old kitchen, not long after Martha had passed. The room was still steeped in grief, everything feeling a little gray, a little muted. I was at the table, trying to make sense of a pile of bills, my mind a fog of loss. Karen walked in, holding that same white envelope. She was 18, and all she'd ever talked about was getting out of Harmony Creek, of seeing a world bigger than the shadow of the steel mill. It came, she said, her voice a strange mix of excitement and dread. She slid the envelope across the table. It was from Ohio State. A thick one, the kind that meant yes. That's great, honey, I managed to say, my own grief making me a stranger in my own home. Your mother would have been so proud. She traced the university logo with her finger. It's a partial scholarship for their teaching program, her dream. But she trailed off, looking around the kitchen, at the pile of my work clothes by the door, at the emptiness where her mother used to be. With mom gone, and you having to work overtime, someone needs to be here. The unspoken words hung heavy in the air. Someone has to sacrifice, and it's not going to be Michael. Just then, Michael burst through the back door, all youthful energy and oblivious charm, smelling of sweat and cut grass from football practice. Dad, coach says a scout from Penn State might be at the game Friday. He saw the letter on the table. Whoa, did you get in? Awesome, sis. He didn't see the conflict in her eyes. He didn't understand what she was giving up. To him, the world was simple. You worked hard. You won. You got what you deserved. He grabbed a jug of milk from the fridge and chugged it, his mind already back on the football field. I watched Karen. I saw a universe of decisions play out on her face in a matter of seconds. The hope, the longing, the duty, the bitterness. Slowly, she picked up the acceptance letter, folded it neatly in half, and slid it back into the envelope. She never spoke of it again. She stayed. She took classes at the local community college, got a job at the town hall, and took care of me. She stayed, and her sacrifice went unspoken, uncelebrated. It festered, turning into a hard, dense knot of resentment in her soul. Michael, the golden boy, had gotten away. He'd gotten a scholarship, a career, a wife. He'd gotten the life she felt she had paid for. End flashback. I snapped the photo album shut, the sound echoing in the quiet hallway. Suddenly, it all made a horrifying kind of sense. This wasn't just about Leo. It never was. Leo was just the battlefield. He was the living, breathing symbol of everything Karen had lost. He was Sarah's son, the woman who had effortlessly captured the heart of the brother she couldn't keep. He was the product of the life Michael had built while she was left behind in the ruins of their old one. Her cruel, meticulous discipline wasn't about making Leo a better boy. It was about control. It was her twisted way of finally having a say in Michael's life, of fixing the perceived flaws of Sarah's gentle parenting. She was punishing the son for the life of the father. I put the album back in the box, my hands shaking slightly. I thought I was just dealing with a bully. But this was so much worse. This was a poison that had been seeping into the foundations of our family for 2 decades. And my grandson was the one drinking it. One polite, permission-seeking sip at a time. The problem wasn't just what Karen was doing. It was who she had become. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that a person that bitter, that full of rage, was capable of anything. Understanding why Karen was so full of poison didn't make the situation any better. In fact, it made it worse. A simple bully can be confronted. But a woman nursing 2 decades of bitterness? That was a different kind of animal. That was a sickness. And I knew I couldn't go to Michael with just a feeling. Or the memory of a flinch. He was too tired, too buried in his own grief and exhaustion. And Karen had her hooks in him too deep. He'd see it as me meddling. As me holding onto some old grudge. No, I needed proof. Hard, undeniable proof that he couldn't explain away. My quiet watch was over. It was time to go hunting. My first stop was the school. I couldn't just march in there like a bull in a china shop. I had to be smart. I waited until Wednesday afternoon and called the main office, asking to leave a message for Leo's teacher, a Ms. Albright. I used the old, worried grandpa routine, said I was just calling to check in, see how Leo was settling in this year. What with everything he'd been through losing his mom. It was a flimsy excuse, but it was honest enough to work. She called me back that evening, her voice professional but warm. Mr. Miller, thank you for calling. Leo is a wonderful boy. Very bright. But, I prodded, sensing the hesitation. She sighed softly into the phone. But he's quiet, more than just shy. He rarely speaks unless spoken to. He's also tired. I've noticed him nodding off after lunch a few times. I just assumed he was having trouble sleeping at home. My knuckles went white around the receiver. The nightmares. Anything else? Well, this might seem like a small thing, she said, her voice dropping a little, as if she were sharing a secret. He's very anxious about making mistakes. In art class, he'll erase a single line over and over until there's a hole in the paper. He always waits for exact instructions. And his schoolwork is meticulous. But there's no spark. No creativity. It's the work of a child who is terrified of coloring outside the lines. Her words painted a grim picture, each one a brushstroke in a portrait of fear. I thanked her for her time, my voice sounding rougher than usual. The exhaustion, the anxiety, it was all adding up. The next piece of the puzzle, I knew, would be in Leo's room. I needed to get into Michael's house. And I needed to do it when Karen wasn't there. I got my chance that Saturday. I called Michael, told him I'd heard his kitchen faucet was dripping again and that I'd be happy to come by and fix it while he was at work. You'll save $100 on a plumber. Kid, I said. It was an offer he couldn't refuse. He told me Karen had a hair appointment and would be out for at least 3 hours. It was perfect. Walking into my son's house felt wrong. It was still the home he'd shared with Sarah. But Karen's touch was everywhere. The comfortable clutter was gone, replaced by a sterile, magazine-perfect tidiness. Everything was in its place, cold and lifeless. I fixed the faucet in 10 minutes flat, then made my way to Leo's room. It was the neatest kid's room I had ever seen. The bed was made with military precision. The toys were all in bins, labels facing out. It didn't look like a room a little boy lived in, it looked like a museum exhibit of one. I started searching, not frantically, but slowly, methodically. I checked under the bed, in the closet. Then, I pulled out the drawer of his nightstand. Underneath a pile of neatly folded socks, I found it, a sketchbook. I sat on the edge of his perfectly made bed and opened it. The first few pages were normal kid stuff, superheroes, cars. But as I flipped further, the drawings changed. They got darker. The pencil strokes became harder, more frantic. One drawing was of a little stick figure, all by itself in a big, empty house, staring at a door with a heavy black lock on it. Another was a dinner table. A big stick figure man and a big stick figure woman sat with plates piled high with scribbled food. A third, smaller figure sat at the end of the table, his plate completely, starkly white, empty. Then I turned the last page, and the air left my lungs. It was a drawing of Leo's room. The little stick figure boy was cowering in the corner, trying to make himself as small as possible. Looming over him was a giant, shadowy figure. It had no face, just two angry, scribbled out circles for eyes and a long, pointing finger. The shadow filled the entire page, pressing down on the little boy, suffocating him. I didn't need a psychologist to interpret this. This was a child's scream for help, rendered in graphite and paper. My hands were shaking. I pulled out my old flip phone, my fingers clumsy on the small buttons, and I took a picture of every single one of those dark, desperate pages. The quality was terrible, but the message was crystal clear. I put the sketchbook back exactly where I found it, under the socks, a secret hidden beneath a layer of perfect order. I left the house, the silence of the place ringing in my ears. Back in my truck, I sat for a long time, just staring at the blurry images on my phone's tiny screen. The teacher's words, the empty plate, the looming shadow. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore. It was a case, and I was the only prosecutor Leo had. I knew then that I couldn't just talk to Michael. He would find a way to deny it, to rationalize it. Karen would twist it, lie her way out of it. No, this truth couldn't be delivered in a quiet living room. It needed a stage. It needed witnesses. It needed to be a bomb that would obliterate all their excuses. And I knew just the place to detonate it. The one place Karen's perfect Christian facade was at its most vulnerable. The Sunday potluck, after church, in front of the whole town. Here is part 6. This is the climactic confrontation at the church potluck. Part 6. The Sunday potluck reckoning. The basement of Harmony Creek First Baptist smells the same as it has for 50 years, a holy trinity of lukewarm coffee, damp concrete, and casseroles. It's the smell of community, of forced smiles and shared comfort. On any other Sunday, it would be a smell I found reassuring. Today, it smelled like a lie. I walked down the steps into the cheerful chaos. Folding tables were draped in red and white checkered cloths, groaning under the weight of baked hams, Jell-O salads, and enough scalloped potatoes to feed an army. The air was thick with the high-pitched chatter of the town's faithful. And in the center of it all, holding court by the dessert table, was my sister, Karen. She was in her element. She'd brought her famous 7-layer salad in a heavy glass trifle bowl. A monument to suburban perfection. People orbited her, drawn to her bright, confident energy. I watched as Brenda Mayfair, the pastor's wife, patted her arm. "Karen, you are just a saint." Brenda cooed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "The way you've stepped up for Michael and that dear little boy since Sarah passed. I just don't know how you do it." Karen beamed, soaking it in. "Oh, you just do what you have to for family," she said, the picture of humble sacrifice. I saw Michael and Leo near the drinks table. My son looked like a ghost, a paper cup of coffee held in his trembling hand. Leo was practically attached to his leg, his head down, trying to make himself invisible in a room full of people. He looked up, saw me, and for a split second, a flicker of something, hope, fear, crossed his face before he looked away again. That was it, my moment. I walked over to Karen's circle of admirers, my old work boots silent on the linoleum floor. I didn't have a pot roast or a pie in my hands. I had the truth. "Afternoon, ladies," I said, my voice quiet but cutting through their chatter like a blade. They all turned to me. Brenda smiled politely. "Frank, we were just saying what a blessing your sister is." "I heard," I said, looking directly at Brenda but speaking for the whole room to hear. "She is a blessing. Let me show you the kind of blessings she gives my grandson." A confused silence fell over the little group. Karen's smile faltered. "Frank, what are you talking about?" I ignored her and pulled out my flip phone. The screen lit up with its weak, pixelated glow. "I'm talking about Leo's artwork," I said, my voice getting a little louder now. drawing the attention of the nearby tables. I held up the phone, showing Brenda the first picture I'd taken, the drawing of the empty dinner plate. His teacher says he's a bright boy. I continued, my voice a low, steady rumble. But she also says he falls asleep in her class. Says he's so tired he can't keep his eyes open. Says he's terrified of making a single mistake. I could see Michael starting to walk over now. A look of confused alarm on his face. Dad, what is this? I didn't look at him. I looked at Karen, whose face had gone pale. Her perfect smile melting away to reveal the hard, cold anger beneath. I flipped to the next picture on my phone, the looming, faceless shadow with the angry eyes. I'm talking about this. Karen, I said, my voice finally rising, thick with a rage I'd been swallowing for a week. Is this your discipline? Is this you stepping up? Making a 9-year-old boy so hungry and so scared that this is what he draws in secret? A shadow that haunts him in his own room? The basement had gone quiet. The only sound was a baby crying somewhere in the corner. Everyone was staring. Karen's composure finally shattered. How dare you, she hissed. Her voice a venomous whisper. You have no right. This is a private family matter. He's a confused old man, she said to the horrified faces around her. He's been mixing things up ever since Martha died. Am I mixing this up? I shot back, my finger jabbing at the phone screen. Is this picture a lie? Is the teacher lying? Or are you, Karen? Are you the lie? Michael reached us, his face a mask of disbelief and dawning horror. He grabbed my arm. Dad, stop it. You're making a scene. You're damn right I'm making a scene. I roared, shaking his hand off. It's about time someone did. Your son is terrified of your sister. And you're too busy being tired to see it. I shoved the phone into his hands. He looked down, and I saw the blood drain from his face as he scrolled through the images. He looked from the phone to his sister's furious, contorted face, and then to his own son, who was now hiding behind my legs, his small body trembling. Karen saw she was losing, and she got desperate. She lunged, not at me, but at Leo. Leo, you tell them, she shrieked, her voice cracking. You tell them your grandpa is confused. Tell them I'm good to you. But as her hand reached for him, Leo let out a small, terrified cry and scrambled to get away from her. And that was it. That was the moment the final wall of Michael's denial came crashing down. He saw it all in that one terrified cry, the flinch, the fear, the truth. He stepped between his sister and his son, his arm shooting out to block her. It wasn't a violent move, but it was absolute, a wall of protection he should have put up years ago. Don't you touch him, he whispered, his voice broken but filled with a sudden, terrible clarity. Don't you ever touch him again. The great potluck was over. Karen's 7-layer salad sat on the table, forgotten. The whole town was watching as our family imploded. The ugly, rotten truth of it all laid bare right there on the checkered tablecloths of the church basement. There was no going back. For a long moment, nobody in the church basement moved. It was like I'd pulled the pin on a grenade. And we were all just standing there, frozen in the ringing silence of the explosion. Karen stood isolated, her face a twisted mask of rage and humiliation. The ladies of the church backing away from her like she was radioactive. Michael was still staring at the spot where his sister had been. His face utterly, devastatingly blank, as if the gears in his mind had seized. I put my hand on his shoulder. The muscle there was tense as coiled steel. Michael, I said, my voice low and rough. Let's go home, my home. I reached down and took Leo's small, cold hand in mine. He squeezed it tight. The three of us turned and walked out, leaving the wreckage behind us, the shocked faces, the hushed whispers, and my sister, alone in the ruins of the perfect life she'd built on a foundation of lies. No one said a word as we ascended the steps and walked out into the cold, drizzling rain. The ride back to my house was the longest 10 minutes of my life. The only sounds were the rhythmic thump-thump of the windshield wipers and the hum of the truck's heater. Michael sat in the passenger seat, staring out at the gray, washed-out streets of Harmony Creek, his face like stone. I watched a single raindrop trace a path down the outside of his window, and it looked for all the world like a tear. Leo was curled up between us on the bench seat, his head resting against my arm. He had fallen asleep, Or maybe just retreated to that quiet place inside himself where it was safe. He was clutching the little green army man I'd found. His knuckles white. He'd survived the battle. Now came the hard part. Back at the house, I helped Leo out of the truck and led him inside. He was so exhausted he could barely keep his eyes open. I settled him on the couch, pulling Martha's old Afghan over him. He was asleep before his head hit the pillow. I walked back into the kitchen where Michael was standing in the middle of the room. Water dripping from his coat onto the linoleum. Looking utterly lost. I put the kettle on the stove, the whistle of it filling the oppressive silence. And then, my son broke. It wasn't loud. It was a quiet, gut-wrenching collapse. He stumbled into one of the old wooden kitchen chairs, the one he'd sat in as a boy, and buried his face in his hands. His shoulders started to shake, and a sound tore out of him, a dry, ragged sob of a man who had just realized he'd been living in a house fire and hadn't even smelled the smoke. I didn't see it, Dad, he choked out, his voice muffled by his hands. How could I not see it? I sat down across from him, the old wood creaking under my weight. I didn't have any easy answers. You were tired, son. Tired? He looked up, his face wrecked with shame and grief. I was a coward. It was easier to believe her. It was easier. He raked his hands through his hair. She sent me pictures of his clean room, of his good grades. I thought she was saving him. Saving me. I thought all that discipline. I thought it was what he needed after Sarah, after he lost his mom's soft touch. God, what have I let her do to my son? He stared at his hands, seeing the calluses from work, seeing them as the hands of a father who hadn't protected his child. The kettle whistled, a shrill scream in the quiet room. I poured 2 mugs of instant coffee, the steam fogging the window. I pushed one across the table to him. This ain't on you, Michael, I said, my voice steady. You didn't put the poison in the well. You just drank from it. Same as the boy. Just then, a small noise came from the living room doorway. Leo stood there, rubbing the sleep from his eyes, the Afghan trailing behind him like a royal robe. He saw his father's tears, and his face, usually so guarded, filled with a look of pure, childish concern. He walked over, not to me, but to his dad. He stood there for a moment, then hesitantly reached out and put his small hand on Michael's shaking arm. Michael looked up, his own eyes red and swollen. It's okay, Dad, Leo whispered, his voice clear and stronger than I'd heard it in years. Grandpa told me, it wasn't my fault. And with those 5 words, something shifted in the room. It was absolution, given from the one person whose forgiveness Michael desperately needed. It was proof that the boy, now that he was safe, was already starting to heal. Michael let out a final, shuddering breath and pulled Leo into his arms, burying his face in his son's hair, holding him not as an obligation, but as a lifeline. After a long moment, he looked at me over Leo's head, and the confusion was gone from his eyes. In its place was a hard, clear resolve. He's not going back, Michael said, his voice raw but firm. I don't care what happens. He is never, ever going back to that house. He took a deep breath. I don't know how we're gonna manage. Dad, I'll have to quit one of the jobs. We'll probably lose the house. But, he looked at me, a desperate hope in his eyes. Can we stay here? Just for a bit? Until I get us back on our feet? I looked at my son, holding my grandson, the 2 of them looking like shipwreck survivors washed ashore. I reached across the table and put my hand over theirs. This is your home, Michael, I said. It always has been. X months have passed since the day the bomb went off in the church basement. Winter has come and gone, and the first stubborn crocuses are pushing their way through the thawing Ohio soil. Things aren't perfect. Things aren't easy, but they are, for the first time in a long time. Honest. My house is different now. It's no longer the quiet, hollow space of a lonely old man. It's loud, it's messy, and it's a home again. The silence has been replaced by the sound of cartoons on Saturday mornings, the beeps and boops of a video game in the afternoon, and the smell of Michael trying his best to cook something that isn't from a box. Leo's colorful, chaotic drawings are now taped to the refrigerator door, a gallery of renewed imagination. A bright, smiling sun, a lopsided-looking dog, a picture of 3 stick figures holding hands, a big one. a medium one, and a small one. Grandpa, Dad, and me. Michael is changed. The bone-deep exhaustion is still there. He quit his second job to be home in the evenings. And the financial strain is a constant, quiet hum in the background of our lives. But the haunted look in his eyes is gone. He's present. I'll find him at the kitchen table with Leo, painstakingly helping with multiplication tables, his brow furrowed in concentration. He's clumsy at it, this fatherhood thing he was forced to neglect. But he's there. He's showing up. That's more than I could have said a year ago. As for Karen, I haven't spoken to my sister since that day. After the potluck, the whispers of our small town did more damage than any legal proceeding ever could. The ladies from the church, the neighbors, the people she'd spent a lifetime cultivating an image for, they saw the truth. Her perfect facade had been built on something ugly. And once it was exposed, it crumbled to dust. Michael got the legal papers drawn up, giving him sole custody and a restraining order. Last I heard, Karen sold her house and moved 2 counties over. Sometimes, a family tree needs pruning. It's a hard, ugly truth, but there it is. Some branches are just poison. The real measure of our new life, though, is Leo. The healing is a slow, quiet thing. There are still nights I hear him stir with a bad dream. He's still a reserved kid, more comfortable with a book than a ball. But the ghost that haunted his eyes is gone. The biggest victory came on a Tuesday. About a month ago, Leo came home from school, dropped his backpack by the door with a loud thud that would have earned a sharp reprimand from Karen, and walked straight into the kitchen. He opened the pantry, his eyes scanning the shelves. He reached for a bag of pretzels. And then he paused. I saw it from my chair in the living room, a flicker of the old conditioning. A ghost of a question in his posture. He hesitated for just a second. Then, he grabbed the bag, ripped it open with a satisfyingly loud crunch, and shoved a handful into his mouth. He didn't ask. He didn't look around for approval. He was just a boy, in his grandpa's house, eating a snack because he was hungry. And I sat there, pretending to read the newspaper, with tears rolling down my weathered old cheeks into my beard. It was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. This evening, as the sun sets, casting long shadows across the yard, the 3 of us are out back. Michael and I are sitting on the porch steps, watching Leo. He's not on the swing. He's just running, chasing fireflies as they begin to flicker to life in the twilight. Their tiny lanterns blinking in the growing dusk. He catches one, his hands cupped gently around it, and runs over to us, his face alight with a joy so pure it makes my heart ache. Look, he shouts, his voice clear and bright. He opens his hands, and the tiny bug flies out, blinking its way up into the purple sky. And then, Leo laughs, a real, deep, belly laugh, the sound of a boy who isn't afraid of the dark anymore. Michael catches my eye. He doesn't say anything. He just gives me a small, grateful nod, and in that look, everything is said. The apology, the thanks, the shared, unspoken promise to keep this boy, this new life we are building, safe. Harmony Creek is still a tough town. The bills are still high, and the future is still uncertain. But tonight, listening to the sound of my grandson's laughter floating on the evening air, I know one thing for sure. This house isn't quiet anymore. And for the first time in a long, long time, we are at peace. We're building our own kind of harmony, one day at a time. And it's strong, it's real, it's enough. As we leave Frank, Michael, and Leo to find their new sense of harmony, it's worth reflecting on the powerful, and often uncomfortable, truth at the heart of this story. So many of us are taught that family means keeping the peace, that loyalty means staying silent. But this story reminds us that sometimes, the most profound act of love is to make a scene, to shatter the silence, and to drag a painful truth out into the light. Abuse doesn't always come with bruises. More often, it's a quiet poison, administered in the form of control, fear, and shame. It thrives in the blind spots created by our own exhaustion, our grief, and our desperate need to believe that everything is okay. Michael wasn't a bad father. He was a man drowning in the pressures of everyday American life, the bills, the double shifts, the sheer weight of it all, and he trusted the wrong person. It's a mistake any of us could make. This story is a powerful reminder to trust our gut, To pay attention to the flinches, the fearful questions, and the joy that seems to have vanished from a loved one's eyes. It asks us to look at the old resentments and unspoken pains in our own families, the ghosts at our own tables, and question what harm they might be doing in the present. Because real family isn't about maintaining a perfect facade, it's about the hard, messy, and beautiful work of protecting each other, especially when it's difficult. What about you? Have you ever had a moment where your intuition told you something was wrong, even when everything on the surface looked fine? We invite you to share your story in the comments below. Your experience could be the sign that someone else needs to see. Wishing you and your family strength and clarity. Take care of each other.